This week, we welcome Amanda Jack, Chief Technology Officer at Manpower Group, to discuss the Future Forward CIO 2025 Outlook Report. In the Leadership and Communication segment, is your board too collegial? Cybersecurity, AI, and economic uncertainty, how internal audit teams are managing 2025's top risks. Burnout in the corporate middle when leadership becomes an issue, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Ransomware, supply chain attacks, 0 days. Cyber threats don't wait, and neither should your business. With ThreatLocker, you're not just reacting to threats, you're stopping them before they start. Our Zero Trust endpoint protection locks down your environment with pinpoint control over what's allowed to run and what's not. No guesswork, no blind spots. Just proactive, built-for-now security that keeps your business moving. Want to see how a true default deny strategy works? Head over to securityweekly.com/threatlocker and take the first step towards shutting the door on threats before they even knock. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 415, recorded September 29th, 2025. I am your host, Matt Alderman, back from a really long, it was kind of like a business personal trip. It was 3 weddings, an engagement and a funeral, and a business trip in the middle. It was a little crazy. Yeah. It's a crazy week. Yeah. So Adrian filled in. Thank you, Adrian, for filling in for me. But it's glad to be back. For this interview segment, let me introduce my co-hosts. First, Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, Matt. Yeah, really excited to be back. I was off for a couple of weeks there doing some other things, but excited to jump back into conversation and see where things are today.
Yeah. Also joining Summer Fowler. Welcome, Summer.
Hello. Amanda, are you in Minneapolis? Did I see that?
I do live in Minneapolis. Today I'm joyfully up at my cabin, so I'm about 2.5 hours north of that. But yeah, live in Minnesota.
So I was in Minneapolis. Actually, I was in Blaine over the weekend. My son was playing at the super rink there.
Yeah.
We had a showcase, so he was playing there this weekend, and it was the perfect weather in Minneapolis. The team got out and golfed a little bit. We rented a pontoon on Lake Minnetonka and had a great time. So
That's
it was
awesome.
a very welcoming place. So yeah, thanks for being great in Minneapolis.
We try.
All right, one quick announcement before we jump in. Don't miss InfoSec World 2025, October 27th to the 29th at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort. Cybersecurity pros, workshops, before and after, and endless networking. Save 25% with code ISW25-SW by visiting securityweekly.com/ISW2025. Amanda has more than 20 years of transformation experience within multiple areas of focus, including workforce solutions, retail, travel and leisure, global data standards, and supply chain optimization. As Chief Technology Officer, she leads the technology function globally across 4 regions and all shared infrastructure and product applications. Amanda, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So this came in as one of our guest suggestions, and I love to pull in different speakers, especially when they do some interesting research, right? And so you guys did the forward-looking CIO report, and the reason it caught my interest was usually the CIO and the CISO have some overlapping priorities or conflicting priorities, maybe at some point, sometimes as well, but when I saw some of the things in the report, I was like, wait, this is probably something the audience would really enjoy. So before we dig into like the findings, give us a little background on the report itself.
Yeah, so it's something that Manpower Group does specifically within our Experis brand to support CIOs across all industries and all customer bases. For those of you guys might not be familiar, Manpower Group is a major provider of workforce solutions, whether that's strategic workforce planning and intelligence, data and insights, staffing augmentation, or even solutions to help solve. Experis is our technology-focused brand at our organization. And as you might imagine, we want to be just as close to what our CIOs and CISOs are facing. We are working with and for them on a regular basis to solve priorities at hand. But those data insights, as you know, in all organizations, right, pretty critical to going forward. So we do this kind of research and then can dig in even at a customer or client company specific level on what needs they might be facing.
Now, what's interesting is I also polled, I think they're your brand too. The audit report is actually from Jefferson Wells, which I think is part of the Manpower Group as well. So it's funny, we got your report and their report in the same show segment. So
Love it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We have multi brands at the end of the day, all about helping clients be successful.
got it. All right. So I think it's like 1,400 leaders, IT leaders, right? In this report. Is that roughly right?
Yep, that's roughly right. And multiple countries. Our footprint is actually over 50 countries globally. So our Experis brand can certainly provide a lot of global insights. But I think in their research, there was 8 to 10 active in across the footprint. Of course, a huge percent of US and Canada for those that are here in this market. But some perspective on what's going on in Europe as well.
Yeah, I did see some of the other country breakdowns, which I thought was interesting as well. So CIO focus, 2025 challenges, but the key findings here have a lot of overlap to the CISO.
Absolutely.
Some big ones, right? Like just out of the gate, growing cybersecurity threats are the top concern for tech leaders around the world. That squarely falls into the lap of the CISO.
Absolutely. I mean, 41% said it was their number one priority. And so, you know, in some organizations, the CIO and the CISO are combined. In many cases, in larger organizations, they are not. I'm lucky to have a CISO peer at Manpower Group who's my colleague. And as I like to say, we're besties. And but to that point, our priorities are very common. And that's what we found in the research as well with other CIOs.
Yeah.
No,
Go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to jump in. Look, so you called it that 41%. That's one of the things that I gravitated towards instantaneously when I read the data, right? So 41% said cybersecurity. That was the top CIO challenge that you listed out. At the very bottom was managing costs at 5%. And I just found that crazy from a not how I would have perceived it from my interaction with CIOs. Like I would have expected those to be flipped, right? Like budgets are a huge concern. The economy's in a little bit of craziness, right? People are trying to figure out what's going on. And cybersecurity, like never the hot button when the CIOs come saying, hey, I really need to focus on this. Like, yes, we have issues, people, you know, something affects a company. And so there's this kind of whiplash around it. But generally overall, I would not have expected 41%. And I thought I saw some are nodding there a little bit or smiling. So I want you to break that down for me. Help me make sense out of that because it doesn't match what I see as experiential.
Well, my take on it, so there's a handful of things in the question, but one of them is, in all sincerity, I don't think budget and cost control ever leaves our priority. So when you think about the CIOs taking this survey, I felt that the reflection of what they were talking about as top priorities are the things that are evolving or changing as we talked with them, as we learned from them, the things that they're like, I have more to do here and I might have to change the way I'm addressing it and or thinking about it or how I'm investing in it. Whereas, you know, budget, I mean, you're right. I can't think of a single day where I'm not thinking about, particularly in this market, what I can do to better manage costs. But arguably the playbook that I need to use to address that and that our CIOs and CISOs need to address that hasn't changed on us as much. Whereas cybersecurity is an ever evolving threat matrix for us to deal with and to assess and combat. And not to mention the second highest priority, AI, is certainly evolved on us, right?
That was going to be my other question was AI only came in at 19. And that also seems like what I'm hearing a lot from my peers, like AI is moving ahead rapidly, whether or not security is being taken into account. And so I also would have thought that would have been higher than the 19% that it is.
I'll be honest, I was a little surprised too, but there was a definite mix, right? So as we broke down the data, there are some that are very much engaging, they're going fast, they're applying organizational changes. And then there are some that are very much kind of still in that laggard grouping and trying to figure out what level of investment and what level of priority should I give to it. And organizationally, how do I solve for it? I will say, though, that one's moving so quickly that arguably if you did that survey today versus 6 months ago, you might get a different answer.
Different data set,
I will tell you my own personal leadership. Like, I mean, in the last 9 months, the amount of, development we've done at Manpower Group, alone, not to mention what we're doing in our client environments, has changed. So I think it's ticking up increasingly in the hockey stick fashion.
Amanda, it's right down where I was going to go. Do you think, the paper discusses, the survey looks at increasing investment in certain areas. Does that mean that we're decreasing investment in other areas, trying to do more with the same amount, or is it getting bigger budgets? Which do you think it is, just in general? And if we're decreasing in anything, where are we decreasing investment?
Yeah, for the majority of us, it is doing more in this space, but not spending more, to answer your question. So it's staying in the same budget, but it's reallocating our priorities and thinking about where our investment goes. I would say where we're reducing, and when you look at where priorities have shifted, the increase of AI investment and being able to increase automation and AI agentic solutions is opening up places to save cost in operational routines. I mean, I can tell you, even in my own environment, like testing SDLC type automation and AI, we were able to cut our costs almost in half. So I'm pulling both my workforce skills and my investments from some of the core traditional tech IT. If you think of like old school tech, right, all of your infrastructure, the more we can optimize that, the more we can invest in. And I think when you think about cyber, that does touch infrastructure a lot, but that's where the money's going.
I was wondering how much of this 41% is because the next three all have a cybersecurity slant to them, right? You've got the AI component, which we've talked about at 19%, but then keeping up with new tech, so cloud spending, SaaS, et cetera, creates cybersecurity challenges, managing risks and compliance. So I'm just, I agree with Ben here that it seems 41% of cybersecurity seems high compared to AI and some of these others, but I'm just wondering if those other areas kind of influence the answers on why cybersecurity is, because cybersecurity is across like the top four.
I think that's super insightful, and I think it's dead on. Even in Europe, so North America was the highest investment priority for cyber. But as you looked at the trends in Europe, it was cybersecurity tied to sustainability, cybersecurity tied to AI. So you're right, the pressures of what needs to be in place, particularly in AI, but in general is changing. And so I think that's very, very correct.
Yeah. There's some other interesting things that just popped out to me in this report, right? Because I like to go through these. Here's one that I guess I'm not surprised, but we should be better. Only 37% of respondents say their risk strategy is very aligned with cybersecurity. But yet cybersecurity is my top concern, which is a big risk, but yet there's no alignment there.
That's a good insight. I mean, I think risk can be such a broader footprint. So I might argue that the cybersecurity piece is the subset of that overall risk profile, right? I mean, when you think about overall audit and you think about the investments across, managing what level of risk you are addressing within your own individual organization, right? We all do the matrices of likelihood and intensity, et cetera, impact of that risk. There's a lot on the table that isn't necessarily evolving or changing with the same threat matrix. So, I mean, I might argue my overall risk spreadsheet detail where we audit and review that, some of those things, the risk level has not changed, which means we're mitigating it. And I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's a little different.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Risk is broader than cyber, but if you're out managing your holistic risks, but only 30% of organizations have it aligned with their cyber strategy, like there just seems to be a gap there in your overall risk. Yeah.
It's not being targeted effectively from a cyber perspective. And I think 63% are admitting that, right? Like that's a pretty glaring.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, maybe I get to ask you guys some questions. Do you think that that's somewhat in the relationship of, I mean, the COO, the CIO, and the CISO have to be pretty lockstep? Do you think that that's indicative that they aren't always lockstep?
Yeah. And I'll take that even further. CFO and CEO and board.
Yeah.
Right? Like they all need to be in lockstep, right? And so who owns risk management for the organization? Board, audit committee, right? And we'll get into some of the audit committee stuff in a little bit in the Jefferson Wells report. But if 63% aren't aligned on cybersecurity strategy, I would say that the board and the CEO have a disconnect with the real risks facing the business, and that's a little scary to me. But we talk about it all the time on this show, so it doesn't, I guess, really surprise me at the end of the day.
Well, and I'd have to relook at it. You probably have it off the top of your head, but there was a fairly large percent of CIOs in this survey that said that they didn't feel that the C-suite understands the complexities of their job, right? Yeah. So I think that ties into it as well, which is, the CISO and the CIO might be aligned, but at the end of the day, if the board and the CEO don't understand at a level of meaning of risk to the company versus, we get into sometimes so specific, and then have we really translated the real impact to the organization if we're not aligned, that can be an opportunity.
Yeah. At least we hope it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
So, Amanda, as we've kind of gone through some of the pieces here in this report, what would you recommend as takeaways from this report? And really, I'm more interested in like the CISO view of this. Now, granted, the CIO's got a component here as well, but our audience is more on the worried about the cybersecurity stuff. Based off this, what should CISOs really think about as their kind of like next steps?
Yeah, something we didn't talk about, but that was pretty prevalent throughout the responses, is this opportunity to really make cybersecurity living, breathing across the entire footprint of the organization. So the CISO might be the primary face of that, but they need responsibility and accountability in all teams cross-functionally, right? And so a few of the takeaways that really highlight to me is one, the obvious, we've stated it, to really be engaging and partnering across leadership to invest and prioritize cybersecurity to meet the modern demands of what we're seeing in threat, right? Two, I think if they're not already heavily leaning into AI ethics, compliance, data privacy associated with it, and making sure that even if your organization is only dabbling, that you are proactively ahead of that and putting the right structures and governance in place. And then third, I think, this one, to me, Captain Obvious, but at the end of the day, it's easier to say it than it is to deliver it, which is to have one strategy for your company. Your company strategy, you shouldn't have a tech strategy and a cyber strategy and a separate brand, commercial strategy. You need one strategy where these pieces are all coming together to deliver for it. The more you can do that, I think the more a CISO can have that equal space at the in the thought and strategy leadership to make sure that we're successfully protecting the organization while driving growth. And at the end of the day, if we're not driving growth, people always say it's the joke, right? If you were 100% secure, you wouldn't be doing business. So that's that balance with your CISO to drive growth, but also really manage that risk.
1 and 3 are very interrelated, and I think they're both harder to do than actually say, right? Because this has been the challenge of the CISO role, I think, a little bit is getting the ability in working across the different business groups, working with the CFO and the CEO and the board, right? Like, because if you can do that, then number 3 gets a lot easier, which is aligning all your strategies because you're aligned across the C-suite, right? But I still think there's challenges in getting the CISO to a level that they can work effectively across the rest of the C-suite and the leadership structure to put them in a position to have a kind of a consolidated strategy, right? Where cybersecurity is kind of built into all the strategies. Those two, to me, I think are still the toughest area to solve for.
I think that's true. I mean, I'll reflect that just this week with our CISO, he was speaking positively, thank goodness, at our organization. But he said, somebody had asked him the question, where do you think the CISO needs to report, right? Do they report to the board? Do they report to the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, right? You can do it lots of ways. Mm-hmm. You can slice and dice it a lot of ways. And his message was, he's like, I've honestly reported to all of those at some point in my career as a CISO. And he's like, and the truth is it doesn't matter as long as the organization is supporting what needs to be done. So I think it's the culture conversation and ensuring that voice is heard if it's not in place.
Yeah, culture is a very important part of this. Go ahead, Summer. Sorry.
Amanda, do you see, with that question in mind, what do you think the evolution of the role of the CIO is going to be as cybersecurity becomes more important to the CIO? Like, we are seeing that more and more now, and it's like, oh, that used to be. So I guess that's the question. Do we see a melding or a blending of a role, or what do you think it happens in the future with these roles?
I think it's an evolution, depending on your size of your organization, right? I wouldn't necessarily blend them so that you have the ongoing continuous learning and awareness of evolving threats. Right. There's a certain level of expertise that a CISO and their team provides that if you're doing that amongst everything else in technology, I myself as a CIO would be like, I'd be worried, right? Am I going to lose sight of all the things I'm trying to deliver day in and day out? I would say, your question's a good one in that I think the evolution of what's changing, and certainly in my space, is the execution, the accountability, the budget planning, the aspects of what needs to be done day in and day out. I think that's more and more the CIO's responsibility. And then I see my partner with my phenomenal CISO, Randy, as, threat awareness, privacy concerns, staying up and beyond what's coming, helping, in the event that we were to have a minor incident, which, knock on wood, we all try to avoid that. He's got all the right processes in place to manage that and for us to work together. So I think it's less of it diminishing, but I think there's an element of just where the execution versus the threat awareness sits.
Okay.
Yeah,
I did answer your question.
Yeah.
Well, it does. But, as I look at like the relationship triangle here, right, you've got the CIO, the CTO, and the CISO. In smaller to mid-sized companies could be one role, by the way, right? They could all be combined into a single person responsible for managing all that. In larger organizations, they'll start to get split out more often, right? Where you have three different people sitting in those roles. And I think aspects of it is about accountability, right? I mean, I've been curious about the future of the CIO role in general as technology evolution, AI, really driving the technology evolution side. And cybersecurity is one of your top risk areas. Where does the CIO role sit long term? Is it really, we've had this debate about the CISO role as well. Yeah. Are you the different types of CISOs and kind of are you transformational or steady state or blah, 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 right? I could almost see the same for the CIO, right? Where the CIO is taking potentially a backseat to the CTO in the CISO potentially as technology evolves the space and the CISO needs to be there. Does the CIO role morph into just an operational role. Anyways,
we've seen that, Matt, right? Like you mentioned, it as a triad, and I think Amanda, that context of like the triad's interesting because it kind of pivots depending upon the org and the structure and like how they're architected.
Absolutely.
Like if you had looked 10 years ago and said to most people, "Hey, do you ever think there'll be a time when the CISO is either promoted into the CIO role or is like the CIO is reporting to the CISO," like they would have said no, like that's probably not likely, right? It's always going to be CIO report. But like 5 years ago, we started to see that change. I've had that role, and I've actually seen people who are CISOs now being elevated and being looked at for CIO roles. And so I've also seen it where the CTO is kind of taking the lead in some organizations, right? And the CIO becomes delivery for the CTO. And so I think, Matt, that's a really good way to phrase it in that triad is, it depends, but it's like, how do you see that, Amanda?
Well, I mean, 2 points. So, and I can speak from experience. When I was in the CTO at a smaller private equity company, I had all three. Because again, size and scale of the organization. So, but in that triad, as you put it, I honestly think the pendulum switches based on organizational need. I don't necessarily think that that's a right or a wrong or necessarily even always consistent across industries and organizations. I think that I think from a talent perspective, you're absolutely right that all three roles really have to understand each other. And I think they're great successors in general to thinking about your C-suite, your leadership, and how do you drive transformation through technology. They're all three critical. So the succession planning question, I think, is an absolute yes. Whether one is more important or sequenced as different table than the others, I really think it has a lot more to do with your talent and your priorities than it does, an evolving trend with CISOs or CIOs.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about that finding in the report, but talent acquisition was there as well. So, I mean, whether it's the workers or the leadership, I think the challenges of finding the right skill set is probably still a challenge for organizations.
And the right people that can work together, right? Like, I mean, I think, the execution, if you get three of those roles that are all executing well together, is so much more force multiplier than, one guy who's really strong and the other two are just supporting roles.
I would agree. And I think that's one thing that's abundantly clear is that all of those roles, regardless of how the responsibilities split in your given company, all of those roles have a increasing demand to be business leaders first, to be able to speak to, understand, and drive the organizational need, and to be strategic advisors in a way that, 15, 20 years ago wasn't necessarily always required. And so I find that compelling and exciting, right? I mean, when I think about the day in of my job, I like having a seat at that table and influencing where we go as an organization. But that means your CISO, your CIO, your CTO, whatever it is, we have to show up a little differently. And we have to increasingly improve our ability to translate.
Which is why segment 2 is leadership and communications. For that exact reason. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
It was fun. Thank you. All right, now let's get into this week's articles. I think it's article 3 or 4 will be the Jefferson Wells one. We'll hold off on that one. But the first article, I love this article actually, is your board too collegial? It's a Harvard Business Review article talking about how the board, they just want to get along. They don't want to tackle big issues and why that's such a problem. You don't say.
I
actually sent this one
everywhere. Like, this is a problem if you're a CISO building a security team and everybody just goes along, right? Like, if you're executive staff and you just go along, like, you need a little bit of, not argumentation, but like you need to challenge people, right? And out of that challenge, I think come the strong ideas, come the big thoughts that actually move you ahead. If you don't have that, man, you don't realize when you're going astray until you really mess things up.
I love this article so much, I sent it to a board I sit on, to all the board members. And actually not because I didn't think that I think we're doing a really good job. We have devil's advocate discussions. We've done a lot of the things that they said where we put really tough topics first. And we recently had to hire a new CEO. The CEO of the bank passed away, and we had to hire a new CEO, and it was a tough process. And I think we did a really good job, but what I loved about it was the ideas on measuring if you're doing this or not. Because you can feel really good, right? You can say,
Yeah.
oh no, we discussed the tough issue and John stepped in and played the devil's advocate role and now we feel really good again. But what if you go back and measure over the past 6 months and realize it was really all just for, the exercise of having a devil's advocate, but you didn't actually really take it into consideration. So I thought the ideas on measuring this were phenomenal, and I'm going to actually implement it and see what happens.
Yeah, there's a good set of kind of problems and then how to address it and then how to measure it, right? To your point, Summer. And I've been in lots of board meetings through various startups over the years, and it's always interesting how these meetings get handled at times, right? And the reason I love this one is, look, I would speak up in a board meeting, and trust me, there are times in my careers it burnt me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I felt that you had to do it, right? You can't walk into these things thinking, oh, everything's rosy, everything's good, everything's just going to keep going as it is. It doesn't, right? And when we see such changes in the industry, and we see the impact of AI and what it's starting to do to every industry and how we do this, you need to be able to raise these at the board level. Like, they're setting the strategic direction for the company, right? These are the decisions you want them to help make and guide the future of the company. And if they're not having these conversations at the board level, holy cow, what's going to happen in 3 years from now when AI, eats their lunch? So that's why, because I've had some of these like contentious discussions at the board, and it's like, look, guys, like, this is what's happening around us. We can bury our heads in the sand and pretend it's not going to happen, or we can be prepared for what that means on the other side.
Yeah.
Anyways, so good. I'm glad you enjoyed it, because anybody that's sitting on a board or has to present to a board, like, this is just some great areas to just read through.
Yeah.
In this one. Yeah. Article 2, cybersecurity without a CISO. Is it possible for small to medium enterprises? Now, I think this article was a little leaning towards some very specific things at the end of the day, but I still thought it was an interesting question. Can it be done? I'm not sure I agree with his outcome, though.
Yeah, this is a hard one.
I thought it was an oversimplification in my mind. What?
Yes.
Do I agree that you don't have to
Yes.
have a CISO? Yes, you don't have to have one, right? You can't always afford one. All the points that the author made. However, you still need someone who is governing cybersecurity, whatever that is, right? And you have to have that. And then to just say, well, just find the tools and make it work. Whew, that was the tough thing for me to swallow.
That was the oversimplification.
Some of the assumptions, right? So the first one, I when it was cost, like, a qualified CISO salary often exceeds the entire IT budget of a mid-sized company. Like, what are you defining as a mid-sized company? Because I don't know, Summer, what do you think on the low side? What's a CISO salary? I mean, what do you think?
On the low side, it could be super low. It depends. Like,
I
is it
see
a real
everything.
CISO?
Yeah, like 160,000 to 300.
Yeah, like somewhere, I'm thinking somewhere 250
in
to
the twos.
300.
Yes.
Right? And so
Yep.
you're a mid-sized company. So I think mid-size, like, 1,000 people or higher. Like, so your entire IT budget is 300,000. Like, I don't buy that. Like, it's just, it was handled at such a very superficial level with really bad assumptions that it didn't lead to the right outcome. So yeah, I think
Right.
if you're a startup and you got 50 people, you probably don't need a CISO, right? But you do get to that point, especially you could have 50 people and doing so much revenue that you really need somebody serious, because the people you're selling to are going to expect security's done well. So You need somebody in charge of the direction of security. Whether that's an SME, a CISO, you need somebody.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Because when I look at what they need is continuous visibility into their digital assets and risks. Well, okay, easier said than done without a staff to actually do it, right? There has to be somebody to do it.
Yeah.
Clear role specific reports. Well, yeah, but somebody has to own cybersecurity, right? And that typically in some of these smaller companies, I've seen it fall to the CFO, by the way. Like if you look at the below the Fortune 500 and you look into that Russell 2,000 to 3,000 size range, right? Like they don't have a CISO. They're publicly traded. The responsibility rolls to the CFO in most cases. It might roll somewhere else, but typically the CFO somehow has some kind of hand in the overall governance. And it's not that it's clear specific reports. It's more like somebody owns it, right? And then you look at what your budgets look like to maintain it. You just don't go out and buy like a native. Basically, he's saying, go get a cloud native service and you're good.
You're good. Yeah. Doesn't work.
So I did decide to look at other articles written by this author just to see, and this is definitely, on brand. Like after this article, he wrote another one about small businesses not requiring big budgets and that their cybersecurity could really be done with the checklist. And it's not that the checklist was bad. It really wasn't. But you can see that this is the brand of this person, really focused in. And I think he's genuinely trying to help small companies, right? He's really trying to lean in and say, look, this is a big challenge. Here are some tools that I can provide you in terms of a checklist or a governance structure or whatever. But if you read his other articles, this falls right in line.
Yeah, and when I see SME, small to medium enterprises, over SMB, small to medium businesses, there's a difference in level to me.
Very different.
Where small to medium enterprises could also be publicly traded companies, right? So, right, it's anyways. So I think maybe the focus was a little off. It should be a B instead of an E. I don't know.
Agreed.
Right. All right. So here's the Jefferson Wells article, which was interesting. I pulled this article. And I had this ready because I was out last week before we did the prep call for the previous segment. And it's funny because they're both owned by Manpower Group, the Experis report and the Jefferson Wells stuff, and how aligned they were, right? From a cybersecurity AI perspective in where the top internal audit teams are focused on their top risks in 2025. So it happened to be a coincidence, but you can see that the CIO report and the internal audit side of the house, they are aligned around at least two big areas here, which is cybersecurity and AI risks. Economic uncertainty may come into some of the budget stuff that we saw in the CIO report. But again, there is a lot of economic uncertainty with rate cuts. Are we going to get more? Aren't we going to get more? What's going to happen with tariffs? Are they going to stay in place? Are they going to get removed? So there is a lot of that uncertainty, but I thought it was very interesting to see the correlation on the cybersecurity and AI stuff, which we just talked about.
Absolutely.
Other than I agree. Yeah.
The other thing I was wondering, because as I was reading through the full audit survey report, it's interesting when you looked at the top, it talks about, okay, for audit committees, these are the emerging risks. When you go down into internal audits involvement in top initiatives, I was hoping to see third party, and I did. And it was about at that halfway point, because I thought, man, oh man, that to me is still such a huge, cybersecurity, yes, new initiatives like AI or new technologies, but third party, supply chain, all of those. So it's interesting that as you look at the buzzwords of what's emerging, but when you go look at involvement, it's still some of the traditional areas.
Yeah. And to your point, Summer, I still see a ton of focus on third-party risk and nth-party risk. And the term is no longer TPRM, it's now NPRM because it's nth party, because of all the really interesting dependencies on providers, right? If you start to really think about concentration risk in the third-party supplier side of the house, you're going to see some really big names being concentration risk areas. These thing called Google, AWS, and Microsoft, these companies, right, that are running services on their infrastructure, there's a lot of really interesting association risk there that I don't know that most people fully understand when they're out doing their third-party risk stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, this one, I thought that alignment was the alignment between these two reports. Exactly. In fact, it was funny. At first, I didn't realize that they were both owned by the company. And as I was prepping and I was reading, the report, I was like, oh, Amanda, this is the same. This is amazing.
Yeah.
So now it makes a lot more sense.
Yep. And it was pure coincidence, by the way. But anyways, they must have come out near the same time. Okay. Next article. This is the importance of building security into modernization from day one. This is the concept of, security by design. This is very focused, I think, more on the federal side in this. And, yes, it needs to be built into these modernization. But again, this is one of those say easy, do hard topics.
It is. Part of the context is one of the things I've been thinking about, because it's something I've been dealing with actually pretty recently. When we talk about shifting left in security, that implies this slow move, right? Like we're slowly gaining ground as we move left. And in some cases, it almost needs to be a forklift left. Like just jump over and start at the beginning to fix the process as it's coming out, as opposed to trying to slowly move there and really not make the process, I think, that a lot of us really want to make.
Yeah, so let me ask this question, and this is what made me think about this. So there's modernization, and you can think about modernization in terms of our critical infrastructure and the electricity grid, water. Those things need to be modernized, right? Okay, that's one area. But let's look at it in the area where we can eat some of our own dog food. Do you think that as we are rolling out AI capabilities, we are considering security being built into them enough the right way? Or do you think that we are missing the opportunity to eat our own dog food and say, AI is modernizing a lot of things. It's not that traditional, moving from, one scale, moving to the cloud, whatever we talk about with that when we thought that was modernizing. But are we doing the right things in this AI push from a security standpoint?
No.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
So what should be done? And that would be my pause for the community, right?
Yeah.
If we want to say over and over and over, bake security in, don't bolt it on later. What is it? Now, if you go to the NIST AI risk management framework, security is one of the trustworthy factors.
Yeah.
And there are questions in the framework that say, about, is this secure? But that's actually that's not even in the build-in phase. Or bake-in phase. That's in the using phase. Mm-hmm. That's it. So I don't know, what should we be doing and how can we influence the community to do the right thing with AI? Because this is a big one.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge here a little bit is because I see these different solutions come into the market, right, around AI governance. What is AI governance? And then you dig into under the covers, and it's like, okay, well, I'm documenting my model. Am I really assessing the model? There's a gap a little bit here, Summer, that I see in the way we're attempting to approach governance and security around AI versus what we can actually do, right? There's certain things we can look at from an infrastructure perspective, but there's a lot of things that I think we don't know yet. How do you monitor the inputs and the outputs of the model in the most efficient way to know that it's not hallucinating? How do you do that? You can look at the infrastructure, right? You can look at the security controls of the infrastructure, but that data input and how those models are built and the prompts and how those come out, how do we validate that those are secure in working as I still see challenges there. And I'm building this stuff just like you are, right? I'm building these agentic AI bots and these capabilities. And what I notice is there's not a lot of things to monitor them. Tell me when they go haywire. It's great that we have an endpoint detection response solution that can give us some detection warnings. I don't see that for these models yet. And I think we're behind the 8 ball when it comes to trying to figure out how to secure this stuff.
And maybe some of it is because, number one, do we know if traditional security is going to be the right security for securing something like a neural network? I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know. Based on current capabilities, I would say not.
Right. So we don't really know the answer to that. So we would need to be turning to the experts who are developing this and having them pay attention to it. And their push is, I've got to make money. I've got to get the functionality out there. It's the same problem over that you have at a Microsoft, right? I mean, they've got to produce, they've got to get functionality pushed out. So how do we even start this? It's a business problem. So how do we actually influence the open AIs of the world and the NVIDIAs who are now working on to actually bake in the security?
Yeah, I'd love to see some telemetry coming out of these systems that we could use to really monitor them and start to understand whether these things are working as expected, right? And I don't see that yet. Not that it's not coming or somebody's working on it, but I'm not seeing that level of capability.
As you dig deeper into this, I think part of the problem is, the speed and the way that the AI generates the data, right? It's not well understood, right? Or sometimes it can't be understood. And so the expectation is you put input in and you expect sausage out, but you have no idea how the sausage is made, right? And so unless it's readily evident that the sausage is bad when it comes out of the process, how do you assess that? It's a hard problem that I think, as Summer said, we're not solving for because we're not having that business level conversation to say we need to figure this out.
And that's only one angle. So there's the sausage maker, which is the model, right?
Yeah.
That's something that has to be secured. But then there are the raw ingredients, which is the data that you're using to train and input into the model. That could be corrupted. Yeah. Then there's the sausage that comes out. Then there are the identities that are being used by the tool. So there are a lot of angles. I think we need to get an AI, like ML expert on and have this discussion on the show. I think it would be awesome.
Yeah, because the model context protocol and all the services wrapped around that, a whole new area of potential attack and breach. And because this is a business discussion, right? Let me tell you what's happening, because I get this pressure every day. We got to build this, we got to get it out, and it's got to perform. We're not thinking about security as much, right? Now I'm looking at ways to audit what our AI bot's doing and how you can watch what it's doing so that you have auditability built in to this capability so that you just don't let these agentic AIs just run around and do whatever they want without knowing what they're doing. We have to solve for that, right? And we are actually doing some work there to do that. But I'll tell you, performance is the biggest issue with AI right now, and getting it to perform well without costing you a small fortune. Because if you design these models wrong, they will eat up a ton of tokens. They will take a ton of time and cost you a whole bunch of money. Just in our recent iterations, we're now over 90% more efficient in what we're doing with these models. That's where all the investments being spent is to optimize performance, not necessarily optimize for security.
I think we saw that with ChatGPT-5, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I think they made a huge investment in chips. Yeah.
And if we actually implement security models around this and start to do the instrumentation, like the speed at which it's happening, you think your Splunk logs are costly now. Wait till you see what it looks like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I just look at the number of token numbers from previous to now and how many tokens you need to run some of these models.
Yeah.
Think about all those being logged. Yeah. All right. So it's just, folks, just so you know, we're not going to bake security into our new AI stuff quite yet. Like I don't think we're quite there yet, and it's still a big concern for me, and I know for a lot of others. All right, let's get over to the communication side a little more. When the breach isn't yours, but the headline is managing association risk. Anybody ever go through one of these?
It depends upon how you define association. Like, yes, I guess, right? Like I've seen this, right? Where like, I think a lot of people saw this with SolarWinds, right? Where there was some type of impact. Not their problem, but like, everybody's calling you to ask, are you affected? Like, what's the impact here? How do you address this? And Yeah, it's really hard, right? Because you're almost acting as the middleman in that situation, and you're trying to get information and trying to figure out what the impact is at the same time you're trying to express it to your customers. You talked about nth party risk. This is it, right? Like, this is where we are right now. Nth party is the problem. Like, you don't know how far this stretches out, where it could have downstream impacts to you.
Yeah.
It's a CrowdStrike. Nobody cared when they were flying Delta Airlines that it was a CrowdStrike issue. You know,
Yeah.
your average passenger did not care that it was CrowdStrike. They just knew that they couldn't. They went to the airport. Every screen was a blue screen, and their flights weren't taking off. And so I liked this article in the sense that it brought again to light that you really need to have a plan for this.
Right.
And your communication team has to be involved. And it's a matter of striking that balance, right? You can't just shove all the blame and say, it's not on us. So, oopsie, it's a vendor that we use. You have to be prepared for how you're going to address these things. And this is a great reminder.
That's a great point, right? When CrowdStrike happened, a lot of people said, well, we could have anticipated this. Yeah, but you could have gone through an exercise where you use a type of event like this, right? That happens.
Yeah.
In cyber, we should be testing this ourselves, but the greater org should be also testing it. Like, we have to think about all the points of risk, not just the ones we can easily visualize. But yeah, I mean, a critical vendor going down and having impact on the rest of your organization and stopping you from doing business. Yeah, that's right out in front.
Yeah. AWS, one of the regions goes down. What's the potential impact to a lot of businesses, right? Or an Azure region, right? Like,
and those questions are important because a lot of people, like, when you look at a region that says, well, there's no backup strategy for AWS, but AWS tells you, or look, it could be anybody, it could be Microsoft, could be Google, and they tell you, well, like, what's the likelihood of us going down? Like, that should be a red flag. Like, if your trust is just that we do things right, yeah, it could be problematic, and we've seen that happen.
The moral of this article is prepare your communication strategy in case this happens to one of your adjacents or one of your suppliers, and you are now kind of associated, guilty by association, and maybe you're not. Right. Yep. All right, last article for this week is the burnout in the corporate middle when leadership becomes an issue. I love the end of this article. Like, I get everything in the middle, right? Toxicity and stuff. But the end of this, senior executives and CEOs have to stop blaming middle management for corporate problems. Empower your middle managers with the authority, resources, discretion, and policy-making capacity they need to help reach career goals and not lose sight of the fact that, you want them in their job. You want them to be successful because you want the organization to be successful. So stop blaming middle management when you guys at the top can't even figure out what your corporate strategy is because the board's too collegial.
There's a lot of potential here, right? Like return to work, right?
I know.
We're seeing a lot of that. The corporate mandate that comes down and the people at the bottom who say, hey, this isn't working because, right? And they're told just to execute on it and not answer that. I think, you have to take the lessons learned, that whole, the customer is always right. Well, I think in this case, like the middle management is frequently right because they're closest to the actual problem that you're trying to solve.
I think the other message that got a little bit lost in this is you have to resolve toxicity at the top.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, you're not going to solve this middle management issue. And that really, the whole thing to this was like, be better. Be better, leaders.
Be better.
Be better.
Be better.
And don't tolerate toxicity. And if you really did eliminate that, you would have a middle management that is more supported.
Yeah. So middle management is also under a ton of stress because of all the things going on with AI. And a lot of people are stressed out they're going to lose their jobs and that they're going to be, the AI is going to take over and do this. And then you add toxicity from a leadership of a corporate level on top of that. That's just putting more pressure and burden on these middle managers, right? Mm-hmm. And if you really want to keep those middle managers around, you definitely have to focus on this because there's a lot of pressures coming from a lot of directions at that level.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what really struck me with this article and with Amanda's CIO outlook is if you dig down into that CIO Outlook survey, there was a CIO that wrote they think the most important thing is empathy. And they were writing about, they said empathy is one of the most important skill sets and things to consider. And I think that really resonates with this Medium article. Leaders have to have some sort of empathy. Doesn't mean that you're always going to, make a different decision. You might have to still make a tough decision to lay people off, do a return to office, whatever that is. But you have to be able to inspire and convey the message with the empathy that is needed to make it successful. And I thought that was it was kind of like a good tie between those two articles.
Wow, we tied a couple of these articles together. Who knew?
It's like you plan this, Matt. It's something like you actually think about it as you pull it together.
I try, but some of it just happened to fall into place. Thank you, both of you, for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.